Welcome to Eight Sided Freaks. And today, this is a UFC St. Louis recap, and we're going to preview a little bit of next week's fight card, which is in the Apex. I believe it is UFC Apex 92 or 93. Gets a little hard to keep track of all the Apex numbers off the top of my head, but that is this upcoming week. We're really only going to go in depth on Edson Barboza and Lerone Muphy, then touch on some other fights on the card. So it's going to be a little bit skewed towards the recap of last weekend's card because we had some good fights, ended up being a fairly entertaining card. So there is a decent amount to discuss from last week. So that is the plan for today, and we will start at the main event of UFC St. Louis. Derrick Lewis versus Rodrigo Nascimento. Derrick Lewis gets it done in the third round via knockout. Anthony, we can swing it over to you first. What did you make of this main event?
I think I don't know. It finished in your typical Derrick Lewis main event, stuff like that. He's able to beat, you know, the people that aren't that good. He'll go on a 2 or 3 fight win streak, and then eventually he gets fed someone that's really good, and then maybe loses. But that's not where he was at in the cycle right now. He, I thought he, I thought he looked good enough. Even tried some wrestling. Got a takedown, ground and pound. I think reverse positions twice. I think on the ground, or at least once for sure. But yeah, ultimately, I don't. He's just too much power, a little too much. And Rodrigo got hit and did not get back up, and then we got the normal, Derrick Lewis fun stuff that happens towards the end of the fight. So.
Yeah, to say the least, definitely entertaining as always was Derrick Lewis post fight. But I was honestly surprised. You brought up the takedown that Derrick Lewis had. That kind of caught me off guard, especially against a guy like Nascimento that thrives on the ground. And this was kind of the way I thought this fight was going to go a little bit. Was I thought Nascimento would either get him on the ground and keep him on the ground, or Lewis would knock him. And kind of saw a little bit of both of that because when they were on the ground, sure, Derrick Lewis got the reversals, had a takedown, but he still looked like he was completely outclassed on the ground for the most part. But Nascimento looked scared of Lewis's power, especially kind of late in that second round, and then obviously he got knocked out in the third round. But it was just one of those things that it didn't surprise me that Derrick Lewis won, but I guess it surprised me that he kept going. And they were saying like he's been running more and more, working on cardio, and he did look like he wasn't as gassed in that third round as we've seen him in previous fights that go to a third round or further.
Yeah, I was surprised by how this fight played out just because, I was surprised at how much Derrick Lewis was willing to initiate a clinch. There was at least one, maybe more, but there was at least one point in time where he emptied with a flurry of shots and then clinched up. And it kind of surprised me because obviously he's not the better grappler in this fight, even though he did some good things in the grappling. The takedown he landed was really, really nice. And he did some good things in the grappling and the clinch, but he was so much better as a striker. Like the difference in striking was, I'd say Nascimento was a little bit of a better grappler, maybe even a significantly better grappler, but Derrick Lewis was like light years ahead in terms of striking. Not even because he's overly technical, just because he's more comfortable and he hits way harder. And I was kind of surprised at how much he was grappling, but ultimately he gets the knockout, so worked out well for him. I will say this was kind of getting to the territory for me personally where I was like, are we about to see 5 rounds of one guy clinch, push it to the fence, we flip around 2-3 times, nobody lands a strike for 4 minutes? And I thought there was a chance we were going to get a real boring main event, but just as I started to kind of realize what was going on, then Derrick Lewis flips the script, lands a knockout. So credit to him for that. And one thing in the future for Derrick Lewis, we don't need Derrick Lewis main events. I don't think Derrick Lewis wants to compete over the course of 5 rounds. I think Derrick Lewis is much better suited for 3 rounds where he doesn't have to pace himself as much. He can let his hands go a little bit, throw a little bit more, not worry as much about that cardio. So let's just keep Derrick Lewis 3 rounds. We don't need to see Derrick Lewis in 5 rounds at this point. He's not going to be a champion, so there's no reason to give him 5 round fights.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. He's never been really one that likes going the distance. And the last true fight that went 5 rounds, wasn't that Almeida fight where he kind of just got laid on for 25 minutes and it was very tedious. And that's kind of where I thought this fight was going. Like you even mentioned already, it was with the first 2 rounds, it seemed like it was going to just be boring and same sort of thing. But thankfully he's crazy and has enough power to just swing for the fences and hope it lands.
That was especially because Nascimento had like 3 decisions leading up to this, and that's not what you want to see from a heavyweight, especially when you're like not even like in the top tier heavyweights. You're fighting people. Like there's no reason a heavyweight fight should go 5 rounds, to be honest, especially if it's not high caliber, like top 10 in the rankings. But I will say, I was also, as someone that had Lewis as the last leg of their parlay, to watch him like stay in the clinch. I was sitting there and I was like, well, that's not your style. That's not how you fight. I was like, please just hit him. And then, to be fair, I did think Nascimento ate a couple good shots, but then Derrick Lewis, he had the record for knockouts eventually. It was just too much. And then, as much as Lewis lacks in some departments, he's always pretty good about once he if it's not a straight up knockout, but he has them stunned, he's usually pretty good about finding that finish shortly after. So I thought it was a fine main event to tap off the card overall that I thought was pretty good for a fight night.
Yeah, and off the back of what you said about him finishing fights, like even in the De Lima fight when he lands the flying knee, like he had to throw a lot of ground and pound to get, like he landed the flying knee in the first 10 seconds and the finish came like 30 seconds in or something like that. So he had to throw ground and pound for a while. And that is another thing about Derrick Lewis is it's not just like shut you off power, but like he will follow up and like he's pretty good about like turning up the intensity. Like even if he's not throwing a ton of strikes, if he's on the verge of getting that finish, he's pretty good at turning up the intensity, throwing the ground and pound required to get the finish. So that's always a positive to see. And I like to see Derrick Lewis get wins against De Lima, Rodrigo, Nascimento, guys like this where we're not in the top 10. Like when you look at his losses, it's a clear like levels divide. Like Gelton Almeida, like top 10 guy, like he's losing to like good fighters. It's not like he's losing to bad fighters when he does lose. So it's nice to see him when he does take that step down in competition to get the job done.
Absolutely. And I mean, it is kind of that, like you said, levels difference. It's once you get into that top 10, you're not just fighting a guy who's one-dimensional. You're fighting guys, like I say, even looking at the champs. Tom Aspinall, very well-rounded. John Jones shows that he's well-rounded on the feet, on the ground. That's just not Derrick Lewis's style. He's very one-dimensional. Tried to throw a change in that this weekend, but even Nascimento clearly outclassed on the feet. Other guys are in that like 10, 15 and out of the rankings range. Very one-dimensional, and that's the thing with heavyweights and why they fight. I think that like they don't last very long. Is it's someone's really good at one thing but not at the other, so it's whoever can use their advantage first.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as far as moving forward for Derrick Lewis, does anyone have an exception to him and Jairzinho Rozenstruik? Because that's the fight that I've been waiting to see. 2 guys, very clear knockout power. Like I feel like that's like the most obvious fights that they could book for both of those guys. Both those guys have been ranked for several years and have not crossed paths with each other when they've each fought quite a few ranked guys. It just feels like that's a fight that, like, surprised we haven't seen it. And you throw that on a card, like, I'm interested to see how that fight plays out.
I like it definitely because I feel like they're probably sharing a lot of opponents at this point. But yeah, there's that's always one where when you get 2 really big people known for their power, it's a little more enticing than the average heavyweight fight because someone should be going to sleep. I just hope that fight doesn't turn into both of them getting gun shy, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We got that once with Lewis and Ngannou, so you never know.
That's what I was gonna say as well. Was like it's one of those things that it looks great on paper. It could be a really great fight, but there's that chance that they're like, I know your power, you know my power. I don't want to get into an exchange. But even in the Nascimento fight, it looked like Lewis was getting a little more into it in terms of he was getting hit more and kind of just going head on, just looking for a finish. So that would be a fun fight as well. Rosenstruik.
And once again, 3 rounds, not
Yes.
5 rounds, please,
Yes.
not 5 rounds.
Dude is a co-main on a fight night. Like,
Yeah.
that would be a great way. Have a solid main event. Do that fight, because if it goes the way we all think and hope it does, that'll get the crowd going, and then be ready for that main event.
Yep. And even when Joaquin Buckley crashed the UFC 300 press conference and asked to be the main event for UFC St. Louis, he said, "Hey, I know you already got a main event, but it's Derrick Lewis. We know he doesn't want to fight for 3 rounds." Everyone knows Derrick Lewis is more than happy to be the co-main event. So let's just keep him there. And as far as Rodrigo Nascimento goes, back to the unranked heavyweights. Feels like unranked heavyweights, there's not even like guys that are clearly better than another. It's just like a pool of like who really cares. I think Ferreira, you're kind of back in that pool of who really cares. It's unranked heavyweight. So I'd
Pull a mid.
I was going to say a guy that might be an interesting fight just because he had a nice win this weekend, even though it's kind of against a guy who clearly doesn't know how to be on the ground. But Waldo Cortez Acosta, that him and Nascimento could be an interesting fight, in my opinion.
Yeah. Waldo, I think it is like 5-1 in the UFC. So
Yeah.
give him a shot at a ranked guy. It's worth a shot.
Yeah. Do have to ask you before we. Oh, go ahead, Anthony.
Oh, I was just gonna say, when we talked about it too last week, I said as much as I dislike heavyweights, I kind of like the Waldo Acosta. So I was like, yeah, I'd be fine. I would, if I, like I said, if you're gonna make me watch heavyweights, at least maybe put a couple in there. Like, so I would like watching him fight nights and stuff with a ranked number. But
yeah, but I want to ask just before we move to the Buckley fight, Derrick Lewis after that fight, and you already brought it up, was just pure comical chaos, I guess is a good way to put it. What did you all think of his antics following the fight? Mooning the crowd, throwing his cup at a reporter. Typical Derrick Lewis.
Yeah, I thought it was, that's part of the Derrick Lewis experience, the fight experience. He only gets so many wins. So when he gets his wins, he's got to do the whole full out all the stops and do everything. So, but that's what makes him fun. That's why fans like him.
I think it's amazing how he finds a way to take it one step further. Like it started with the pants coming off, and it was like, oh my God, he took his pants off. And that is like slowly climbed to like pulling your ass out just in the middle of the octagon and throwing your cup in the crowd. I don't know how many wins Derrick Lewis has left in the UFC, but as we rise, I am scared of what could potentially come next because he's running out of ways to take it up a notch. I'll just say that.
Hear me out. Derrick Lewis retirement fight, when he wins, he's going to walk out of that octagon butt naked.
I could see that.
Yeah. If anyone could or will do it, it would be Derrick Lewis. I don't know how we would find a way to get away with it, but I don't know how we found a way to get away with what he did this weekend. So I'm not going to put it past him.
And even his post-fight interview with Bisping was entertaining. And
what did he say? I'm not letting no. I didn't even know who this guy was. I'm not letting a taxi cab driver from Brazil beat me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Always has a way of with words. We'll put it that way.
Yep, I'm with you.
Nothing like a Derrick Lewis fight night.
That is true. It is nice, Derrick Lewis in the crowd. Derrick Lewis in the Apex, not as much fun as Derrick Lewis with the crowd.
100%.
Moving down to the co-main, we had Joaquin Buckley and Nursulton Ruziboev. This was a fight that we talked about as a preview, and we were like, this is kind of a weird fight. But Buckley found a way to get the job done despite the comical size difference between these two. I knew there was going to be a size difference, but when they're in the octagon sitting across from each other, it's like, holy shit, these guys are like, it was legit just comical, the size difference. It's crazy that these two managed to make the same weight. As far as the fight goes, Joaquin Buckley gets out of there with a decision win and remains undefeated in the welterweight division in the UFC. Jerry, what did you make of his performance?
I mean, starting out with what you started with, the height difference, it kind of looks like when you play the UFC video game and you just do open weight classes and hit random and you get a flyweight against a light heavyweight or something. Just the size difference was crazy. Well, he took advantage of that. Ruziboev was throwing some nasty flying knees and looked like he had a power advantage on him. But Buckley realized the length was an issue and took him down 4 times and kind of kept him there. And there was once, I think, Buckley almost got submitted. I think he almost had an arm bar in. But besides that, he kind of just dominated him on the ground and did what he had to do, which I was surprised. I thought Buckley was going to be in there and start striking a lot more like we usually see him do, but this was a nice little change to his game and continues to do well at welterweight because he came down from middleweight, I believe, right? Yeah, and so did Ruziboev. So seeing him beat a guy who's usually in middleweight after he didn't have success in middleweight, Buckley on that side, was a pretty solid win for him.
Yeah, I agree. I thought I was out on Buckley at first only because he has that one highlight knockout and everyone was like, they show it 24/7. But I've been, I've actually liked what I've seen recently enough from him, and it's made me, a little excited now when I see his fight because I was excited for this fight. I think now he's working his way up organically and he's on the normal trajectory of a good fighter trying to become like a ranked fighter that can maybe be in title contention. And I thought in this fight, kind of like you were saying, he finally fought smart a little bit and just did his takedowns and stuff. Still looked good on his feet per usual, but I think overall, I know I had never really seen that Ruziboev dude, but I know we had talked about it was going to be like an interesting fight. Like it wasn't just going to be a straight cakewalk. And I thought he dealt with everything pretty good. So yeah, I think that's just another important win. And I can't remember if we said he had fought a main event before or he had also been a co-main before, but
yeah, he was the co-main for Atlantic City.
So yeah, I feel like he's really working his way up a normal trajectory while looking good in his fights and doing different things. He's winning now. He's winning co-mains. He's doing everything he needs to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with what you said about being out on Buckley. I was also out on Buckley, and I was kind of teetering between being in and out. And then he fought Imavov. When he fought Imavov, he just had no shot at dealing with Imavov's length. And as we've seen, Nascimento's a really good fighter. So in hindsight, that win or that loss doesn't look as bad for him. But also, I was like, this guy just can't compete at middleweight with his height and his reach and his struggles to get inside against a longer opponent. And then he drops down to welterweight, and now the whole equation changes because now I think he's still a little bit shorter than the average welterweight, but it's not, 5 inches shorter where, he's going to struggle in every single fight with a massive reach disadvantage. And all of a sudden, Ruziboev comes down from middleweight, and now he's massive for the weight class. So I think welterweight suits him much better. And even in this fight against the length, he did better because I think he approached it from a much smarter standpoint. He wasn't out there, just winging hooks for 3 rounds and missing. He takes Ruziboev down early. Ruziboev really has a lot of sting on his punches in the first round. Buckley didn't throw as much in the first round. Takes him down a couple times. Now the second round comes around. Those punches don't have as much sting on them. Buckley starts to land his own shots. Starts to land more takedowns. So I thought it was a smart approach considering he struggles with that length. And so I have to give him a lot of credit for how he approached that fight, considering some issues he's had in the past and how he approached them. I thought it was a smart game plan from Buckley. And I'm interested to see what he does in the future because we're at the point where I think he's going to get a relatively big step up in competition. Like he beat Luque. I thought the step up in competition was coming. That he gets Ruziboev probably because they just needed someone so Buckley could fight in St. Louis. I think this was more about the date than the opponent. This next one is probably the step up in competition. He calls out Conor McGregor. Why are we even bothering with that? We all know we're not getting that fight. Call out. His job was to call out any welterweight inside of the top 10. If he would have called out Shavkat Rakhmonov, I would have said, that's a little goofy, but I at least see what he's trying to do here.
You're in the ballpark at least.
Yeah.
That's the wrong opponent, but you're there.
Yeah, exactly. You're in the right, frame of mind. He was miles off on this one. So I assume neither of you think he should fight Connor. What do you think moving forward for Buckley? Where do you see this? What do you see as a more logical next opponent? Jerry, we can throw it over to you first if you have someone in mind.
Yeah, I don't see Connor fighting Buckley ever. I don't see that happening unless Buckley quickly rises to a champion status. Maybe then, but he did. He even addressed that in his post-fight press conference. He was like, "Yeah, that's not realistic. I know it's not, but I just had to do it, kind of thing." Then he said Gilbert Burns was the guy he was looking at, and I like that fight. Gilbert obviously ranked 6th, kind of digressed a bit, losing to these top-ranked guys, these up-and-comers who are on the way. So maybe a guy like this, he's becoming the why am I blanking on the word? The gatekeeper of the top 5. Something like that for Buckley I'd be intrigued in that just because I don't want to see him fight Wonder Boy. I don't know. Maybe a Sean Brady would be interesting, but anything in that top 5 seems a little tough. And I still am holding out for Ian Gary and Colby. So that kind of just leaves Gilbert as the perfect guy for him.
Yeah, I was going to say that 10 to 6 range because, I mean, you got Neil at 10. But the first name I was thinking to move up a little bit to was the Sean Brady, Gilbert Burns. And then I did actually like the Ian Gary fight. But if you're, I understand wanting the Colby one more. But those were any 3 of those names I thought would be funny. Although a couple of them are a little different fighters too, so it'd be different things he would have to worry about. But it's still 3 fights I would like to see. Just kind of like you said, the jump is what I'm now interested in. I'm at least now, like I think Buckley's done well enough to where I'm actually interested in the jump, not just like, oh, why are they making someone fight down?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the positive thing about Buckley is when you look at the rankings, the only guy that's fought is Luke. So he fought Kevin Holland 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So you really have a clean slate to work with, and there aren't a lot of fights booked in this welterweight division. So you really have a lot of options. So I agree with a lot of the names you guys threw out. Gilbert Burns, I think that may be a little bit of an aggressive jump. I wouldn't hate seeing Sean Brady or Jeff Neal to start out. And that's why when you're on the mic, you call out Burns, and that kind of, helps you jump a couple extra spots with your mic call out, rather than sitting here going, I think Brady and Neal is a little bit, more realistic. And, hey, those are both really tough fighters as well. That's the thing about the welterweight division is maybe Jeff Neal's not going to be a champion. Maybe Sean Brady could, but, there's a lot of tough guys, even in this 6 to 10 range. You're not getting a cakewalk from any of these fighters. So I'm interested to see how he looks against, a top 10 guy who's got a little bit more left in the tank than Luke, with all due respect to Luke. I think Luke has been through a lot in his career and is kind of running on fumes at this point.
Yeah.
Even for how entertaining he was in his prime.
Absolutely. Like bounce off what you just said about how everyone's tough. This is one of the tougher divisions that kind of gets underratedly slept on a bit and not discussed enough now that obviously Leon Edwards and Bilal, that whole thing and how that just keeps stalling and slowing it down a bit. But this is similar to like lightweight and bantamweight where once you get into that top 10, there is no easy opponent at all. And you're going to have to improve on one skill or another one way to be able to keep moving up the rankings. And that's kind of what I think we all want to see for Buckley is see, can he improve to become a top 10, top 5 guy?
Yep. Go ahead, Anthony.
I was just going to say, and I think it's because a little bit of, say 2 or 3 years ago when it's Usman, Masvidal, Edwards isn't fighting anybody, and Covington, it's really all you had. And the newer guys or the younger guys are, kind of finally here 2-3 years later when you have Shavkat, Jack Della, Ian Gary, Sean Brady, so you got some fresh blood. And then there's still, names like Colby, like Steven, even Burns a little bit, although I agree he has digressed. There's still some of the older guys that are still very competitive. So this is, kind of like you said, I think this is where it works out, where sometimes a division gets really, really good we'll see how long, but.
Yep, I agree with that. I think there's a good mix of ranked, the guys who have been ranked for a long time and are a little bit older, but still good fighters, and then young guys who are approaching their prime that are really good fighters. So I think we're kind of getting those two things meeting at the same time, and it creates a pretty strong top 10, even top 15 fighters. Last thing I'll add about the welterweight division is I would not be surprised if we get some fight announcements soon for this division. You have guys like Ian Gary, like the Ian Gary and Colby fight is a rumor. I don't know if that's going to go down. But then you also have like Michael Venom Page. I wouldn't be surprised if he's on the 304 card. I wouldn't be surprised if they put Ian Gary on that card in England. Just I know that he's not from England, but they tend to kind of compile their European talent and put them on those cards. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's on that card. So I think in the coming weeks, we're actually going to see a decent amount of fight announcements for this welterweight division. And maybe Buckley's in that list of names. We'll have to wait and see.
I do want to ask you guys why we're talking about this division, because Kevin Holland had a fight announced against Michael
Olajaychuk. Yeah.
What do you think of that fight? Just while we're on the welterweight, welterweight, middleweight, because he's moving back up to middleweight for that.
This, to me, that fight screams this UFC 302 card could really use one more fight on the main card. How are we going to do that? It's pretty soon. Call Big Mouth. I think that's how that went down, and he probably couldn't cut to 170 in the amount of time they were asking, so they just throw him a 185er. That and Olajaychuk is a striker who will strike with Holland and kind of creates a fun matchup on a card that needs more fun matchups.
Yeah, I would just after based off hearing that, I could agree. I was looking at the card, and obviously you have an Islam Dustin main event, perfect. I think a Strickland Costa co-main is actually pretty fun. I just think Costa is super fun, and I think Strickland, that's someone that Strickland could have a fun fight with and pressure with. But then going down, yeah, I think any pay-per-view should at least have 3 good fights, and if the third one isn't gonna be, for all the marbles or like rankings, at least it could be a fun striking match. Then I would agree. Then the Holland one's perfect.
Yeah. There are some interesting fights on that card otherwise in terms of kind of unimportant and just they kind of just filled up the card.
Yeah, it's nice to get another fight in there because what are you getting from Jelton Almeida and Alexander Romanov? 2 heavyweights that love to gas after 5 minutes. If that fight doesn't end in 5 minutes, we may be in for something ugly. Randy Brown doesn't exactly scream main card of a pay-per-view, but there's some intrigue there. And you got other guys like I'm intrigued about Roman Kopylov, but he's coming off a loss. And it's like when you can bump Kopylov from the main card down to the featured prelim, kind of helps the card overall. So it's nice just to see everything bump down a slot, even if Kevin Holland isn't like at the peak of Kevin Holland. So, and maybe he wins and everybody's back on board. Kevin Holland kind of does the same thing that Derrick Lewis does, where he's losing fights to, that was fun. Let's see Kevin Holland fight again.
Yeah, and nothing like a big mouth on short notice.
Yeah, exactly. All right, moving on with UFC St. Louis, Carlos Ulberg, Alonzo Menifield. The synopsis of this fight for anyone that didn't watch: Alonzo Menifield, don't know how he came up with his game plan, but decided to aggressively pressure and throw wildly with a guy whose best trait is counter-striking. And the counter-striker went out because he's a good counter-striker. So Carlos Ulberg, good performance from him. I don't know how in-depth we have to go because it was really, that was the whole fight, and it was really just, hey, you're the guy you're fighting played into your best skill, and you capitalized on it. So, I mean, credit to you for that. But that doesn't mean you're going to be a world champion as well. But I do want to get your guys' thoughts on Ulberg and where he could potentially go from here, because Alonzo Menifield was ranked at 11th, I believe. So, and Carlos Ulberg enters the rankings in the 11th spot. So we have a new ranked light heavyweight, and this is a division that needs ranked guys. If what we just talked about with the welterweight division, with guys coming in, getting ranked, light heavyweight division could really use that. So Carlos Ulberg moving forward. What do you guys make? Anthony, what do you think of Ulberg, and are there any names that stand out to you in this light heavyweight division that you'd like to see him fight?
Well, one, I was gonna say that I was really hoping to like get to fully watch him and learn and get see where he was at. And once again, I didn't get to see anything because he won in 12 seconds. But it's hard for me. I see the name. Why don't we give him the Anthony Smith test? That'd be right there. That's perfect. Then I'll actually get to see where he's at. Because yeah, I mean that'll show. Genuinely that'd show where he's at in that light heavyweight division. So that's a name I like.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. That's like, especially after Anthony Smith's performance the other week, that kind of shocked everybody. It's like, see what he has left in the tank, feed him another guy. Unless Anthony Smith really wants to go up in the rankings, I don't see him being a title contender again or champion ever. But so maybe that the guy who I think would have been a great fight for him, I know he's now fighting Jamal Hill, but Khalil Roundtree and Carlos Ulberg that'd be a fight that intrigues me. Two big swingers, and obviously like Khalil Roundtree's very pressure orientated and goes forward. And you said already, James, that Ulberg's best skill is his counter striking. That would be an intriguing fight to me, if not like the Anthony Smith, or maybe the one I thought of immediately was like, give him Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker's been struggling as of late a bit, and why not give him another guy that'll go at him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm happy that Khalil Roundtree gets an opportunity. He's a guy that I think needed to get an opportunity in the top portion of that division, and he's going right to the top. So he got his opportunity for sure. So, but in the future, I think that Roundtree Ulberg matchup could be fun. I've got 4 names. I think you book 2 and 2. I don't really care how you do it. Carlos Ulberg, Anthony Smith, Bogdan Guzkov, Johnny Walker. I think we've got 4 fighters there. 2 young guys just broke into the rankings. 2 older guys. Johnny Walker, is kind of what he does. He loses to the top guy, then he fights someone below him. We see if he loses to the guy below him. If not, we move him up again. That's kind of what we do with Johnny, and that'll probably be his whole career. So I think you could make 2 good fights out of those 4 guys. If you made me pick between them, I'd probably go Walker versus Ulberg and Smith versus Guzkov. There is a little bit of comedy considering the fact that Guzkov and Anthony Smith look exactly alike. So let's play into that a little bit and have some fun while we're here. So that's kind of the way I would book those 4 guys. Those were kind of the guys that stood out to me. 3 of the 4 have fought in the last 3 weeks. Walker fought early this year, I believe January, and got knocked out. So took a little bit of time off, and now we can get him back in here. So that's kind of where my head's at here with light heavyweight.
I like those shouts. I think that's solid matchmaking. But that also leaves like, who's Volkan Ozdemir fighting? He's kind of just there.
Yeah. That's the problem with light heavyweight. There's a lot of guys that are kind of just there.
Yep.
Like Nikita Krylov, you've been winning, but we haven't seen you fight in ages. Like, that's my biggest problem with light heavyweight is when you look at the rankings, that is the issue, is he's just kind of there.
Oh, it says Ozdemir's fighting Walker at June 22nd.
Really?
Huh.
I missed that one.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm pretty good at keeping up with fight announcements, but I completely missed that one. So
she's not teed into light heavyweight.
Oh, that's right. They're sending Johnny back to the desert. That's the Saudi Arabia.
I do remember that.
That's funny. Well, the loser of that fight can fight someone in that we just talked about. So that we can do that instead. All right. Let's wrap up UFC St. Louis with some final thoughts. And we've got plenty of time today, so we can throw out as many final thoughts or go as deep on these final thoughts as we would like. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, like, this card may not have had, 10 ranked fighters on it, filling up the main card, or a handful of guys in the top 5, but we ended up getting some like entertaining fights throughout the card. So there is a decent amount to talk about. And Anthony, I believe it is your turn to lead us off if you have a final thought to kick us off.
Yeah, I definitely have one strong final thought, and that was Chase Hooper. Looked really good. I I see we talked about it last week on the show, but he's generally it's fun when I always like Chase Hooper because he showed up completely one dimensional. Um, got got destroyed a couple times, but took it on the chin, and like I felt like each fight we get to see him get a little bit better, or we genuinely get to see like what he's working on in camp, because then he'll add that for his next fight. And It'd been a while since we had seen him, but he was definitely training and in the gym, because his striking probably looked better than it has. Give or take, he dropped his opponent pretty early, or like midway through the first. So I'm sure your striking looks better when you're fighting a stunned opponent for the rest of the fight, especially after he like 10-8'd him that first round. But which I still think the other guy did not tap. I don't like, which is kind of unfortunate, but yeah, I was gonna say overall, I think Chase super striking was good, and then obviously his submission and ground game has always looked good. So that was a good win, and I'm glad to see that improvement in the striking department. So I'm already excited for his next fight. And then,
go ahead.
No, you can go. I was gonna say.
I was just gonna bounce off the Chase Hooper thing. Like he looked good, but that overhand he threw looked so goofy that knocked him down. Kind of like threw it all the way arching, but got to give props to his defense also. Only 2 strikes allowed.
Yeah, that
like,
I mean,
when you're on the dude's back and just grounding and pounding the entire fight.
Yeah, Borshev definitely was not. He's not like allowed to apparently like call the fight, because I already knew. I had a feeling like that man wasn't gonna tap. That's why I don't think he did on that second round. Like he hit it the once, but you can't be in a guillotine for that long and then then tap like later. And he was like pissed when when they called it. And then
I do want to add on Hooper as well. I love seeing fighters make improvements. Like you said, when Hooper got to the UFC, he was very one-dimensional. And I still don't think he's a great striker, but I've seen improvements, and he's still only 24. So you have to make credit to improvements. He's also jumped up from 145 to 55 and looks much like physically more like a UFC fighter, much more muscle, and that'll help him a lot in the grappling. And even if this was like, I don't want to say it was an easy stylistical matchup, because Borshev can really, really strike, but like when it gets to the ground, he was the better grappler by a mile. But hey, like you can say that for a lot of his fights. So I liked seeing the development from Hooper, and I think he deserves some credit for that, because he's a guy who has been criticized heavily for the way he's looked in between the ages of 19 and 23, and now we're seeing him go out and put some of the best performances of his career. And in this fight and his last fight against Lovett was a good one as well.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other thing I'll touch on real quick, I don't know if you guys want to go, but give or take, the Robellis obviously kind of disappointed and struggled, and obviously is flawed, which we could have assumed, give or take. We were judging him off a total of a minute fight time in the octagon or whatever. But I know I kind of said it earlier, but I had liked Waldo Cortez Acosta a little bit in his other fights. I think he's just better than being a mid heavyweight fighter. So I thought that was a good win for him. Little multiple layers, which he doesn't, or at least some of the fights that I watched, his wrestling wasn't on full display, but he showed it this fight that he can, use it as a pathway to victory. So I'm looking forward to some Waldo Cortez Acosta fights a little bit on some, like I said, on some heavyweight fight nights where they got to push it super towards the main event of the card for some reason. But it's fine. I'd rather take him than some of those other heavyweight fighters.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, but I will say Despain's grappling was shockingly bad. But I also do like Waldo. He's a guy I've been interested in for a while, just because I think he has an interesting background going from pitcher to UFC fighter, and he kind of throws punches like he's throwing baseballs. I just think he's an interesting guy to watch, and I'm with you. I like him more than a lot of these unranked heavyweights.
that was definitely too. I can't remember if it was his first fight or his second fight, but the first fight I caught him, one of those ones, they gave the picture background, and I was like, okay, that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's solid. I mean, I got to see him on the regional scene while I was at school in Arizona, and he just was levels ahead of some of those people there. Kind of just dominated. Now it's cool to see him there. He's won what 3 straight now in the UFC. So, and I want to say, I think the commentary said that he only had 1 takedown until this fight, and then he got 3 takedowns in this fight. So, showing that he's growing his game and learning to be more of a grappler than just a striker and going for it.
Oh, that was it for me on mine.
Yeah, I can throw mine out, or Jerry, if you want to go, it does make a difference to me.
It's all good. Go for it.
I'll go Esteban Ribovic. I mean, we only had 37 seconds here, but I mean, he knocked out Terrence McKinney bad. Crafty little head kick, put a kick at the end of a combination and put it right on Terrence McKinney's chin. Ribovic has been very interesting. He had a really nice win over Kimwella Kirk and did some other things. And at lightweight, I think there's a lot of good prospects. And I hadn't really been paying attention to Ribovic, but hadn't been looking at him in the same light as someone like Mikdebek or Bly or like some of these other lightweight prospects because there's so many. But I think after that performance, like next time he fights, like that's a guy like, all right, I got to see how legit this guy is. Just because he's been winning fights in the UFC, fairly young guy, and that was a great performance, great knockout. So Ribovic is a guy that I've got my eye on moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, 37 seconds. That's the thing with Terrence McKinney fights. Someone's always going to asleep in like the first 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And if they don't, Terrence McKinney gets to the second round and says, all right, now you put me to sleep. That's how Terrence McKinney fights.
One way or another, someone's out early in that fight. And makes for an entertaining fight one way or another. But God, that head kick was just – he was out. He was out cold as soon as he got touched.
That reminded me of the Kevin Lee, Conor Gillespie, but also I saw a post on Instagram of like the camera was on McKinney for like 45 seconds after he got knocked out for some reason, and like that's how like people. I was joking. That's how people get like knocked out in the movies because like it took him 10 seconds to like come to, and then he kept like shaking his head and going with his eyes, and it literally just looked like he was acting like what it's supposed to be like on a knockout, but. He got hit bad.
Yeah. Really bad.
That was my only final thought. So shout out to Ribovic.
Yeah, I was going to mention him, but the other one a fight that was just absolute blast from the first round. Guys definitely gassed a bit in that third round and were thrown in almost slow motion, but the Billy Ray Goff and Trey Waters fight, that first round was just full guns blazing, just no defense at all. Both of their arms were down by their sides, just swinging. It made for a very, very, very exciting first round. But the fight got really sloppy after that, I'll say. They just looked like they used everything they had in their tank in that first round. Ended up going to a decision, and there were still some fun exchanges, but, man, there were some points where it really looked like they were throwing in slow motion.
Billy Goff is a crazy person. His Contender Series fight, he gets hurt bad and comes back. Same thing in his first UFC fight against Kinoshita. That guy's crazy. That's all I have to say with that. Billy Goff, he's a crazy person in a good way for fighting.
That one, and then the other one that I just want to give him a shout out because he kind of surprised as a massive underdog, but Diego Ferreira, 39 years old, got the knockout win or TKO win of Mateusz Rebke, and looked really good doing so. It looked like one of his best performances I've seen him fight, at least. So props to him for keeping it going at 39.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on that either, aside from the fact that cardio looked really good for 39. And he's had a tough strength of competition, so credit to him for getting in the win column. All right, swinging it over to UFC Vegas, whatever. I know I should probably know what Vegas it is, but At this point, we all know what we're getting into when it starts with UFC Vegas. They're all pretty similar. Main event, by far the most important fight, Edson Barboza versus Lerone Murphy. This is a pretty big test for Lerone Murphy. He's a guy from England who has long been one of the better prospects of the featherweight division. Hasn't fought often enough, but he wins when he fights. Now we're bringing him to the U.S. I believe a lot of his fights were going down in England.
There's a lot in England, a lot in Abu Dhabi.
Yep. So this is his first time in the U.S. in a while. But he gets a shot against Edson Barboza, who's known as one of the, I don't know if best is the right word. I think, I was going to say one of the best strikers of all time. That's a tad bit of a hyperbole. One of the most exciting strikers, one of the most dangerous strikers that we've ever seen step place in the octagon. And Edson Barboza coming off a really good win over Sadiq Youssef, who I thought Sadiq was going to win that fight. So Edson Barboza still winning fights, far past his prime. What do you guys make of this matchup? Jerry, we can send it over to you first because Lerone Murphy is the Englishman, and I know that probably intrigues you here.
Oh, always. I mean, he's had some interesting fights of late. 2 decisions in his last 2, both last year. It's coming up on 10 months since he last fought, and then that one he fought Joshua Kubayo and won by unanimous decision. It's going to be interesting to see how he does here because this is a massive, like you said, massive step up in competition, and Edson Barboza's looked good as of late. Sure, he had lost he lost 5 of his 7, but now he's won 2 straight against Billy Q and Sadiq Youssef, 2 tougher guys, especially Sadiq. But he's kind of looking like his old self a little bit, even though obviously his prime's gone. But it's going to be a fun fight. I'm curious to see because, when you said this is his first time fighting in the U.S. in a while, I was looking at his record. This is the first time he's ever fought in the U.S. It's always been England or Abu Dhabi, which kind of surprises me, but one of those things that he did really well on the regional scene, and now is kind of trying to get there on the UFC side of things. And if he wins this, it opens up many, many doors for him in the future of this division.
I agree. I mean, I think this is, I don't know, Barboza is one of those names where that's a tough step up if he's your first time stepping up because he's a vet, tricky. He does, give or take, Barboza has a similar game plan he's going to use every time. Like, you kind of already know what he's bringing in. It's just, getting the timing of it or what specific strikes he will be throwing that are already in his bag. And I was looking at give or take, I know he's been winning more recently, but also when he was on that losing streak, though, it's names like Paul Felder, Justin Gaethje, a couple of years, then it's Giga Chikadze and Bryce Mitchell. So, I mean, all pretty good names. And then, of course, Barboza was beating the people he should beat. Probably not as many as he should have, though. Shouldn't have lost all of those fights, but I think we'll see. I am tempted to always go Barboza, like I was saying, with just being the vet and how tricky and skilled he is with his striking. But with him getting older, 38, this could be one of the ones where the younger dude who's or the prospect who's a little younger, who's looked pretty good so far, just hasn't been as active, could get the job done against him.
Yeah, I forgot to throw the odds up there at the top right now. Kind of scattered a little bit, but minus 148 on the Lerone Murphy side, plus 124 on the Edson Barboza side is kind of the middle ground. But like I said, it's a little scattered. It's a really tough fight to call, in my opinion. Like, I don't know how good Lerone Murphy is going to be over the course of 5 rounds. He hasn't fought 5 rounds. A lot of 3-round fights. He didn't show cardio concerns over 3 rounds, but there's a big difference between 3 rounds and 5 rounds. And we saw Edson Barboza in his last fight was the guy with the cardio edge over the course of 5 rounds. And Lerone Murphy's a good striker, like above average. I'm not saying he's, a world-class striker. Doesn't have the boxing of Ilia Topuria, but switches stances, has good power, can throw power shots with his left and his right hand, has some good kicks. Like, there's a lot to like here. But Edson Barboza, like, you want to strike with Edson for 25 minutes, you're one spinning hook kick from losing the fight. And it's a really tough fight to call, and I'm still going back and forth in my head. I'll be honest, I don't have a pick today. I'm very conflicted and don't know which side I'm gonna go when I write the preview this week. So I don't have strong thoughts on this, but the last thing I will add is a very important fight for Lerone Murphy, low key. He's long been a guy who is one of the better prospects. I know he's had several serious health issues, both in his life. I believe some of that came while he was in the UFC, but he's 32. It's not like he's 28.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happens when you don't fight a ton. So if he doesn't, I don't want to say this is like, you're never going to be ranked if you don't win this fight, because that'd be a little too aggressive. But at the same time, this is a fight that, you'd much rather break into the rankings at 32 than lose this fight, than have to win 2 more, then break into the rankings at 33, almost 34. So, like, this is an important fight for him if he wants to really be considered an elite fighter, which he has the potential to be.
Yeah, and we've seen some of these young guys like Diogo Lopez. I know Bryce Mitchell's not that young anymore in terms of prospect-wise, but he's still on that up-and-coming side of things where these guys are breaking in now. This is Lerone Murphy's time to break in to an extent. If he doesn't do it now, with how infrequently he fights, he might never do it. So it's a massive fight for him against a guy who's been in the UFC longer than Lerone Murphy's been training MMA. With an active team, it says. It seems like he started training in 2013. First fight was 2016. Barboza's first UFC fight was 2010, I believe. So that also just shows that for a striker, especially, impressive durability. But we'll see how much durability Edson Barboza has left. He's looked good in those last 2, but it's be a test for both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a crazy stat. And I'll also add, Edson Barboza at 38 years old, still very explosive. Like, in theory, Edson Barboza is the type of fighter that when he gets old, he doesn't really provide you much, but somehow he's 38 and is still one of the most explosive strikers on the roster. Like, that's just crazy that that's even possible. In theory, he should not be as quick, not be as explosive, and should have been losing fights 2 years ago and should be out of the UFC. But hey, I mean, I'm saying that as credit to him for withholding that and still having some of that explosivity.
Yeah, I mean, he won that Billy Q fight with a straight knee knockout. So that was a year and a month ago. So yeah. He's still dangerous, very dangerous, and Lerone Murphy has to be aware of that because he's never lost, he's never been hit that much. So something to watch for.
Yeah, and shout out to Edson Barboza as well, because I was there at UFC Kansas City when he landed that knee against Billy Quarantillo, and that was a fun one to see live. I'll just say that. Everyone there that I was with rooting for Edson Barboza, he lands the knee. It was a good time. That was a nice fight. So shout out to Edson for that one. All right, the remainder of this card, like we've talked about, not really a ton to love, but there are a few fights that we can touch on a little bit with some final thoughts. We can start with if either of you guys have a fight that really stands out that you want to start off with, feel free. If not, I can throw one out there.
I got one just because I'm a big Adrian Yanez guy, and liked him as a prospect. He's fought competition his last 2 fights and lost to Rob Font and Jonathan Martinez, getting finished in both of those. So, kind of after you do that twice, definitely can't do that 3rd time. Hopefully it wasn't all, just another prospect not living up to it. But so this will be I think this is a really important, get back fight. And the level of competition changed a little bit. So, we'll see if he can get back to the hot streak he was on.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I also really liked Adrian Yanez, and I picked him to win both those fights he lost. So for me, that's definitely one that I'm watching with a close eye. That one stands out.
Yeah, I don't really have one that kind of stands out. I know Chaos Williams can be entertaining at times, but he can also be a rather boring fighter. Seeing Abnis Magomedov with that massive drop off since his last fight was kind of surprising because wasn't he on the main card of something last time he fought?
He headlined against Sean Strickland, and then he fought Kyle Brawlho in Brazil on the main card. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so 2 losses shows how quick this company moves, and it'll be interesting to see what he can do against Warlley Alves because I feel like Warlley Alves has been around for a while as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you there as well. Abus Magomedov. At one point, people were saying he was going to be a champion. I even picked him to beat Sean Strickland, but I pick a lot of people to beat Sean Strickland, except for when Sean Strickland loses, and I pick him to win. That's my relationship with Sean Strickland. Anyways, Abus is definitely a guy to watch because the skills are there. If the cardio comes around, maybe he can be something good, but that's something he's got to hope for that one. Anyways, my final thoughts, I don't have a ton. Clayton Rodriguez, Alatang Lee, kind of a fun fight. Some interesting names there. Tom Nolan, impressive on Contender Series, and then lost his UFC debut. Maybe there's nothing here. Maybe the UFC debut was a fluke. I think we're going to learn that this weekend. We're going to find out. Temba Grimbo, Ramiz Brahimaj. Ramiz is a guy that had I don't want to say hype at one point, but a lot of respect at one point. Hasn't fought very often, coming back from injury. Temba Grimbo, a guy who picked up a lot of steam because The Rock bought him a house. He's got a couple of impressive wins in the UFC, a lot of hype around his name. I'm not sure what his career looks like, but I think a lot of people are really high on him. I'm not necessarily that high, but I mean, I'm going to watch and give him a chance, and maybe I should be higher on him. So those are kind of some of the names that stand out. And when I say stand out, it's not like, oh my God, this is earth-shattering, groundbreaking stuff right here. But, worth noting on this type of card, those are kind of the names that are a little bit more important than the others, in my opinion.
Another guy I'm just kind of intrigued to see because it's his UFC debut and he's 9-0 is that Omar Sy. I know virtually nothing about this French kid or guy, and he's just 9-0. See how he transitions to the UFC.
My one other one was actually just going to be Angela Hill because she's fun striking for women's MMA. So if you want to, a women's MMA fight, an Angela Hill fight's not a bad place to start.
Yeah, I'm with you on both those. Angela Hill deserves some respect for the amount of times that she has fought in the UFC. So good call there. And that's it for this week. UFC St. Louis recap, UFC Vegas 92 or 93. I still can't remember what it is. Preview. We will be on Friday. I'll have best bets and the preview out. So if you want more in-depth thoughts on this week's card, you can find them there, and it'll have everyone's predictions on that. And next week, we will be back with probably a slight recap of this upcoming card, and then we will see what news is going on and how we want to round out the rest of the show. I think we're going to see some fight announcements. There's just a lot of smoke around some fights being announced. Maybe they get announced, maybe they don't. We'll have to wait and see. Hopefully, for our sake, there are some fight announcements to talk about. But regardless, we will figure something out during the UFC's off week before UFC 302. But if you're still here, thank you so much for watching this week's episode of 8-Sided Freaks. We will catch you next week.